Imagine being stranded in an ancient bunker with power systems failing, toxic air closing in, and no food or water to sustain you. Now picture your only ally as an otherworldly companion whose own biology becomes your lifeline. Literally. In this tale of desperate survival, our human engineer and his blue-skinned partner discover a shocking secret. Her species can produce a nutrient-rich substance shared through profound intimacy. What starts as a grim fight for life soon evolves into a deep bond that unlocks astonishing alien technology, forcing them to choose between personal boundaries and the chance to save countless lives. Will they survive long enough to unravel the bunker's secrets? And how will their evolving connection reshape their destinies? Stay tuned for the full story to uncover every twist and revelation. If you enjoy narratives where survival and emotional bonds collide, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and support more captivating stories like this one. Consciousness slammed into Ronan's mind with the force of a collapsing star. One moment he was floating in a haze of pain and darkness. The next, the relentless strobe of emergency lighting pried his eyelids open. Each flash bathed the cramped, unfamiliar chamber in abrupt streaks of vermilion and black, making him feel as though he were blinking in and out of reality. For an instant, he couldn't recall his own name, let alone where he was or what disaster had struck. His limbs felt impossibly heavy, weighed down by a gravity he had no memory of encountering before. The oppressive air pressed against him, intensifying the throbbing in his temples. He tried to shift from his prone position, but only managed a weak twitch in his left arm. A strangely musical voice, tinged with echoes of alien resonance, broke through the reverberations in his skull. "Don't force yourself to stand just yet." It was female, that much he could deduce from the tone, but every word rang in his ears as though transmitted through water. In a surge of memory, he saw blue skin and bright lilac eyes, accompanied by the firm sensation of being yanked into an escape pod. He remembered the smell of burning metal, the acrid bite of electrical fires, and the shriek of rending hulls. Managing to pry his eyes fully open against the insistent red flash, he glimpsed her silhouette in the gloom, a lithe figure moving with an uncanny grace, as though unaffected by the heaviness that pinned him down. She stepped into a patch of light, revealing her features. Her name rose unbidden in his mind, like a single intact page floating atop a flooded archive. Leanna. The memory of her pushing him into that small capsule to save his life rattled him. Exhausted as he was, he forced a half-chuckle that turned into a ragged cough. "So it was you," he croaked. "I'd have never made it off the station if not for that shove." She inclined her head, her luminous eyes sweeping over him with concern. "Yes," Liana replied. "When the reactor alarm sounded, I spotted you trying to stabilize the communication arrays. But the entire section ruptured faster than either of us expected." She gestured around the chamber, lips pressed together in what might have been exasperation or relief. "We had only one functioning escape pod left on your side of the station's ring. Our time was too short to debate the matter." Ronan tried to parse everything she was saying, but his mind still felt murky, as though he'd been submerged in some kind of sedative. He clenched and unclenched his fists, struggling to regain full sensation. His breath came in shallow, stunted pulls, each one tasting stale and electric, like old wiring. "I appreciate you deciding my fate on my behalf," he said, voice dry with forced humor. "Truly. Next time, though, maybe you could call a shuttle for two?" Leanna offered him a thin but almost smile. She sank to one knee, meeting his gaze more evenly. "We didn't have the option for a gentler exit," she said. "You were unconscious, and I had to make a call." There was a minute quiver in her typically composed features. "I'm just relieved we both ended up here, wherever here is, in one piece." Wincing, Ronan shifted so he could sit partially upright, propping himself on an elbow. The emergency lighting gave him only sporadic glimpses of their environment. High, ancient walls engraved with swirling patterns, arcane consoles caked in dust, and a single sealed doorway in the distance. For the first time, he also noticed the battered remains of the escape pod behind them, its surface scorched and twisted by what looked like a crash landing. "We're definitely off the station," he said. "But where did we end up?" Leanna took a moment to gather her composure before explaining. Our emergency systems detected this facility when we launched. The pod's autopilot executed a forced landing as soon as it found breathable atmosphere. Or at least, that's what it indicated just before most of its systems failed. She cast a quick, uneasy glance around the chamber, taking in the strange metallic script that ran along the curved ceiling. This structure is ancient, predating both our species' presence in this sector. That much I've been able to surmise. Ronan let his head fall back against the cool wall behind him, the dull clang echoing in the enclosed space. His attempts to focus on his recollections were spotty at best. The entire station had been on the brink of meltdown when an unknown anomaly in the reactor core destabilized everything. He remembered sprinting through corridors, trying to reroute power to salvage communication lines so at least part of the crew could escape. That was when Leanna had appeared beside him, urging him to flee. Soon after, he must have blacked out. I guess we should be thankful that this bunker, if that's what it is, still has some kind of emergency lighting, he remarked. Otherwise, we'd be fumbling in total darkness. Not just the lights, Leanna said, tapping the worn console nearest to her with the back of her knuckles. There's a slight hum in the walls, suggesting a minimal power supply is still online. But communications are non-functional, and I'm detecting significant instability in the environment. The filtration system might be on its last legs. That statement brought Ronan's attention to the stale, metallic taste in the air. He breathed more consciously, feeling the dryness scratch at his throat. So we're short on time, he surmised. Any other good news? Leanna's features tightened. I'm afraid the limited food and water rations that were standard in your escape pod have either leaked out or spoiled in the crash. I managed to retrieve only a couple sealed packets of hydration gel, but the rest is useless. She paused, her eyes flickering with an emotion Ronan couldn't immediately read. Guilt, perhaps, or worry. Your species' nutritional needs are higher than mine, especially given your size and the residual trauma from the crash. You'll be the first to deteriorate if we can't find a source of nourishment. Well, that's a cheery thought. He grimaced, the reality of their predicament settling uncomfortably in his chest. At least we have each other, right? Leanna's mouth twitched into something that might have been a wry smile. I suppose that's better than being alone, she admitted softly. If anyone's resourceful enough to figure something out, it's you, Ronan. You were a lead engineer on the station, always rewriting protocols and reconfiguring systems. A crooked grin found its way to his lips, despite everything. Ah, you noticed my tinkering, he said. You didn't think it was too presumptuous? She shook her head, sweeping a stray strand of white hair away from her face. Some of us recognize that your modifications boosted efficiency, even if you broke a few rules. That's how I know if any mind can decipher ancient consoles and questionable technology to keep us alive. It's yours. Her reassurance stirred a faint spark in Ronan's chest. Pushing aside his lingering disorientation, he readied himself to tackle their dire circumstances. He forced himself to inhale steadily and think like an engineer. Then let's see what exactly we're dealing with, he said, bracing his arms on the floor to try standing. But first, I need to be sure my legs still work. Ronan wobbled precariously as he got to his feet, knees nearly buckling from the combined onslaught of gravity and exhaustion. Leanna sprang up in a fluid, almost superhuman motion, her pale fingers steadying his elbow. The difference in their physical resilience was stark. Her species had evolved under conditions that demanded not just intelligence, but also heightened agility and stamina. Even so, he could see the faint tremor in her grip, proof that she wasn't entirely unaffected by the station catastrophe and their crash landing. He mustered a grateful smile. Thanks. My muscles feel like pudding. Let's just hope I can push enough buttons on these alien consoles to be useful. Leanna's lips quirked again, this time in genuine amusement. No heroics yet. Ease into it. She guided him gently toward the central console cluster, where ancient runic symbols glowed in time with the flickering emergency lights. I've tried interacting with these interfaces, but the dialect is unfamiliar. I'm only catching traces of meaning here and there. Maybe you can pick up the patterns faster. Bracing himself, Ronan leaned forward, gingerly pressing a few of the blinking symbols. Nothing happened at first. Then an entire portion of the console lit up, revealing multiple screens, some fractured or dim, others shining in odd sequences of colors. A low hum reverberated through the floor, skittering up his legs in a vibration he instinctively recognized as power distribution. There's definitely a core system here, he murmured, and it's definitely older than anything used on either of our worlds. Leanna studied the shifting lines of script on a secondary panel. It looks like this might be a status display for environmental controls. These bars, they could represent oxygen or something akin to atmospheric quality. Then let's see if we can interpret the color changes. Ronan's eyes darted from one readout to another, correlating patterns. His mind worked through permutations, recalling the partial logs he'd encountered in the station's xenolinguistic archives. I think orange might mean compromised. Red means near critical. Green or blue are stable. So if these bars, blinking orange and red, are any indication, we have less than optimum air pressure and cleanliness. Leanna's countenance darkened in concern. How long do you think we have before it slips into the lethal zone? He touched another set of symbols, hoping to glean a more precise figure. The console hissed in protest, displaying an error message that, even without understanding the exact words, he inferred was something akin to system failure, insufficient power. Hard to say, he admitted. Hours, maybe a couple of days at best. If we breathe slowly and keep physical activity minimal, we might stretch it, but it's not promising. Leanna nodded, expression grim. Understood. Then let's keep searching. There might be an auxiliary power supply or some hidden resource caches built into the bunker's design. If this place was intended as a survival shelter, even ancient civilizations would have stored something. Suddenly, Ronan's stomach twisted with hunger and thirst. The dryness in his throat was more than discomfort. It was a real need creeping upon him. His body demanded more than the meager hydration gel left in the rations. And if we don't find anything substantial soon, he trailed off, not wanting to finish the dismal sentence. Leanna's gaze settled on him with an odd flicker, concern laced with a deeper, more complicated emotion. We won't let it come to that, she said softly, but with surprising resolve. There might be another solution if all else fails. He blinked, puzzled by her cryptic remark. Before he could press her on it, a sudden alarm klaxon from the console blared to life, the jarring shriek echoing painfully in the small chamber. The noise forced them both to clamp their hands over their ears. The panel flickered wildly, and several symbols scrolled by in rapid succession, too fast to parse. What did you do? Leanna shouted over the din. Just touched something I probably shouldn't have, Ronan grimaced. Let me see if I can shut it off. Ronan jabbed at several glowing icons, hoping one of them would silence the blaring alarm. Each press seemed to intensify the shriek, so he finally resorted to a method he was sure would make any archaeologist cringe. He slammed the side of his fist against the console. Miraculously, the wail ceased, replaced by a sputtering crackle of static. Then the lights dimmed for 3 heartbeats, flickering back to life in a distorted pattern that left half the room in darkness. Leanna exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. Not the most elegant solution, but at least it worked. She angled her body, letting her eyes rove over the newly dimmed corners of the bunker. The swirling patterns on the walls seemed almost to shift and change under the strobing lights, giving the sense of a living structure. We should do a thorough check of all these compartments. Maybe there are manual release panels or some hidden store of supplies we can use. Ronan nodded, though the alarm had rattled him more than he cared to admit. The dryness in his throat worsened, and hunger gnawed at his belly. The fear that his body might give out on him tugged relentlessly at the back of his mind. Even focusing on the console's symbols was becoming an exercise in willpower. They separated to comb the perimeter. Leanna moved with a sure-footed precision, pressing her palms against sections of the walls that looked marginally different, waiting for any sign of a hidden door. Ronan mirrored her actions along the opposite side, though with less elegance and more clumsy muscle. At last, with a hiss of ancient hydraulics, a panel slid back beneath his hand, revealing a shallow storage unit. Here, he called out, hope surging in his chest. Leanna hurried over, her footsteps eerily silent, as if she weighed next to nothing. Together they peered into the small compartment. Inside were a couple of crystalline canisters, sealed tight with a once luminous band of script that had long since lost its glow. The two gave each other a swift glance, then Ronan carefully lifted one out. The canister's exterior was cold, layered with dust. He prayed it still held something edible, or at least drinkable. With cautious fingers, Leanna tested the seal. A muted click sounded and the top portion detached. A chemical smell wafted out, making Ronan wrinkle his nose. The contents, if they had once been food, were now a gelatinous mass, half evaporated. Looks like it hasn't aged well, Leanna muttered. Most of it has degraded over centuries, maybe millennia. Ronan's shoulders slumped. Figures. He checked the second canister. Its seal appeared intact, and the band still showed a faint luminescence. Cracking it open, he discovered a powder-like substance that smelled metallic and sour. Might be better than nothing, he ventured, though without much confidence. Leanna grimaced, reattaching the lid with a frown. I'm not sure your digestive system could handle that. If it's spoiled, you'll be worse off. We may have to keep searching. She placed the canister aside gently, not wanting to discard it just yet in case of desperate measures. Let's hope we find other compartments in better condition. Ronan rubbed a hand across the back of his neck, frustration coiling in his stomach. We can't rely on scrounging up random bits of ancient food, and from the state of this place, I doubt we'll find a miracle pantry hidden in the walls. There may be another option, Leanna said somewhat hesitantly, eyes flicking away from his. My people, we possess certain biological adaptations that could help, if we truly have no other choice. He straightened, intrigued and apprehensive. What do you mean? She didn't answer immediately, turning back to the console. Let's keep that as our last reward, she finally murmured, and Ronan thought he saw a darkening hue spread across her blue cheeks, a sign of embarrassment or reluctance. Without elaborating, she started examining the panel again, leaving him to wonder what precisely she intended to offer, and why it bothered her so much. They spent another hour or so, Ronan guessed, methodically searching. Their efforts revealed a couple more compartments with half-usable scraps, an ancient water filter that might function if powered, some metal rods that could serve as makeshift tools or weapons, and a partial first aid kit containing withered bandages and brittle vials. All of it was centuries, if not thousands of years, past its prime. Eventually, the flickering lights grew more erratic, and the air tasted even staler. Ronan sank to a knee, dizziness weaving through his brain. He pressed the heel of his palm to his forehead, willing the feeling away. This is getting bad, he said in a strained whisper. I can't think straight. Leanna hurried to his side, that strange resonance in her voice intensifying with concern. You're suffering from nutrient depletion on top of the crash's after effects. Humans need regular intake, correct? My people can endure much longer without, but you've been through substantial trauma. Stop reminding me, he said with a weak laugh, though the attempt at humor fell flat. Cold sweat beaded on his brow, his body screaming for calories and hydration. I wish I could hack this bunker to conjure up a meal, but we don't even have a functioning translator, let alone power for a synthesizer, if this place even has one. Leanna paused, her expression tightening. The corridor they'd been exploring was dimly lit, the walls covered in a bizarre script that wound like vines. She guided him back to the main chamber, where the largest console was, and gently helped him sit with his back against the wall. Listen, she began in a measured tone. I told you my species has biological adaptations. One of them is the ability to produce a nutrient-rich fluid, an emergency measure evolved over centuries of harsh environments. It's functionally similar to what some Earth mammals provide their offspring, but more advanced. The flicker of comprehension in Ronan's eyes quickly merged with surprise. You're talking about milk? Like your version of it? It's more complex than that, Leanna replied, clearly flustered. Her cheeks deepened in color as she continued. We don't speak of it with outsiders. It's considered intimate, personal. My people only share it in dire situations, usually among close kin or in certain rare circumstances. She cut herself off and exhaled, searching for the right words. Between bonded partners. But we're desperate and you clearly need nourishment. Ronan's face heated. He wasn't sure if it was from hunger or the delicate subject matter. I don't want you to do anything that violates your cultural taboos, he said quietly. I'm already grateful you saved my life once. I won't ask you to do something that might shame you in your people's eyes. Trust me, Leanna said, swallowing hard. You're not asking. I'm offering because watching you waste away when I have a means to help is unthinkable. Our situation is beyond normal protocols. If I do nothing and you collapse, what use are we to each other? Her tone was resolute. She sank down to face him, shoulders squared as though bracing for an argument. But Ronan only nodded slowly, a swirl of confusion and relief washing over him. If you're sure, I won't refuse, he murmured. Though I admit this is not how I imagined my rescue going. Leanna snorted, almost a laugh, though tension still lined her features. Nor I. Let's not dwell on the awkwardness. If we're going to do this, we need to remain calm. The process demands physical contact, and I have to concentrate to trigger the production. Ronan's stomach churned at the mere thought of nourishment, however strange the method might be. His body was desperate, and a raw gratitude welled up inside him that she would go this far. Just tell me what to do, he whispered. Leanna moved closer, settling onto the floor beside him. She closed her eyes briefly, her long lashes fanning over her cheeks. We have to synchronize breathing, she explained in a hushed voice. It helps me shift my body's biochemical signals. Try to follow my breaths. Ronan inhaled slowly, matching her rhythm. Her presence was steadying, and he was struck by how her alien physiology seemed so human in certain aspects. A torso, arms, legs, the curve of a face, yet so distinctly different in subtle cues of color, shape, and texture. He could almost sense the energy coursing beneath her cool blue skin, especially in the subdued lighting. After several deep breaths, she lifted a slender hand to brush his forehead. The contact was feather-light, and a tingling current zipped through his scalp, making him shiver. Relax, she murmured, though her own voice trembled faintly. If you tense up, it complicates the flow. He nodded, letting his eyelids drift shut for a moment, focusing on matching her measured inhalations. He felt the dryness in his mouth, a reminder of how dangerously close he was to dehydration. But at the same time, a strange warmth spread from the point where her palm rested on his temple. When Leanna shifted, he opened his eyes to see her leaning inward. Despite the alien cast of her features, there was something universally tender about her expression, as if she were torn between embarrassment and compassion. She hesitated, then exhaled in acceptance of the moment. We can't do this halfway, she said. My body needs to sense the direct need of another. It's part chemical, part empathic. If you recoil, it won't work. I won't recoil, Ronan promised, clearing his throat. His eyes flicked to her face, searching for any sign of discomfort. I trust you. A brief flicker of relief crossed her features. She carefully positioned herself so that he could lean against her. Then, with a slight tremor in her hand, she pressed her palm to the base of her collarbone, just below the neckline of her uniform. The first subtle glow began to emanate there, soft and silver, like moonlight dancing on water. Ronan watched in fascination as the glow intensified, radiating outward in faint tendrils that crisscrossed her skin. Each pulse seemed in sync with her heartbeat, and curiously, with his own. His pulse hammered in his ears, adrenaline mixing with a surreal calm. It felt as if the ancient bunker walls were receding, their predicament momentarily forgotten, replaced by this charged bubble of warmth and necessity. Leanna guided his head gently. Try to take what you need, she whispered, voice nearly lost beneath the hum of the console. Her uniform shifted aside slightly, enough to bare a region of her upper torso that glowed with a pale luminescence. Ronan's face burned, but he forced himself to remember that this was survival, an act beyond mere social convention. The first taste was both electric and soothing, an odd contradiction that made him gasp. It flooded his mouth with a richness he could not compare to anything else. Part mineral, part sweet, undeniably alien, yet somehow comforting. Warmth spread through his throat, fanning into his chest. He swallowed and felt immediate relief. For a heartbeat, Ronan's mind swam in sensations that were both physical and something deeper. He felt an intangible current passing between them, as though the luminous fluid carried echoes of Leanna's very essence. It was undeniably intimate, but not purely sensual, more like a profound sharing of life force. He wondered if her species literally transferred parts of their genetic memory or emotional core through this exchange. But he dismissed the speculation in favor of simply focusing on the nourishment his body desperately required. He drank in measured sips, not wanting to overwhelm her. Each swallow quenched the dryness in his throat, and the starburst of warmth that followed soothed his gnawing hunger. Gradually, color returned to his vision, and his headache began to abate. He felt stronger, more alert, as if life were pouring back into his limbs. Leanna's eyes were half closed, her breath hitching with each pulse of energy. Her skin glistened in the dim light, the silver glow tracing the lines of her collarbone. Ronan could sense a strain in her posture, as if the process taxed her body in ways that were not immediately apparent. "Enough for now," she murmured after a moment, carefully easing him away. "Too much at once could be harmful to both of us." He released a shaky breath, trying to gather his thoughts. The wave of relief was almost dizzying. "That was... I don't even know how to describe it," he said, his voice still raspy but more grounded than before. "Thank you." She averted her gaze, a bluish tinge staining her cheeks. "Please, don't think too deeply about it yet. Rest. Let your body process the nutrients. I'll be fine." Her words came out quickly, as though she were eager to move past the moment's intensity. Still, Ronan wasn't about to pretend it meant nothing. He could feel her presence more acutely now, a subtle awareness of her physical and emotional state, as if a fraction of her empathy had lodged itself in his consciousness. He sensed her concern, not just about the bunker and the air supply, but about how he might judge this act, how it might alter whatever tenuous connection they already shared. "Really," he said softly, meeting her gaze, "I can't thank you enough. I know it isn't trivial for you, and I respect that." She nodded, expression fleetingly open with relief. But the moment was cut short by another rumble that shook the bunker's foundations, causing bits of dust to cascade from the ceiling. The flickering light sputtered but managed to remain on. Leanna snapped into alert mode, pushing a stray lock of white hair from her forehead. "We should investigate that. Whatever is powering this place might be on the verge of collapse, and if so, we need to figure out a solution before our air is gone." Ronan gripped her arm lightly, testing his renewed strength. His muscles no longer screamed in protest. That fleeting moment of closeness still thrummed in the back of his thoughts, but there was no time to delve deeper. Survival was paramount. "Right," he agreed, pushing to his feet. "Let's see if we can keep this ancient relic from burying us alive." Leanna rose gracefully, giving a brief nod. "I'll check if there are other sectors in this bunker we haven't accessed. Maybe there's a stable power core or something akin to a generator that we can reroute. With your engineering skills, we might coax it into giving us full life support." Ronan inhaled more steadily than before and mustered a wry grin. "I suppose it's time to break a few more rules of alien technology. Let's just hope this place doesn't punish us with more ear-splitting alarms." They shared a fleeting look, part determination, part cautious optimism, and ventured deeper into the labyrinthine corridors, guided by the dim pulses of ancient lights. Though the bunker's gloom pressed in on them, Ronan carried a renewed spark of energy in his veins, courtesy of Leanna's remarkable gift. And while neither of them spoke of it directly, both understood that the bond they had just forged, however temporary it might seem, had already changed the course of their desperate struggle to survive. They followed a narrow passage branching from the main chamber, guided by the faintest whir beneath the metal floor. The corridor's walls bore the same strange script in swirling reliefs that glimmered in intermittent pulses. Every so often, the floor trembled slightly, as if the bunker itself were shifting in its long slumber. Ronan walked slowly but with newfound steadiness, buoyed by the nutrition Leanna had provided. He could still taste the traces of it on his tongue, a mixture of minerals and subtle sweetness that reminded him just how alien she was, and yet how closely their lives were now intertwined. She kept a respectful distance as they explored, no longer hovering protectively at his elbow now that he'd regained enough strength to stand on his own. Still, he sensed her watchfulness. Through the soft hum in his veins, he could almost feel her presence like a second heartbeat. His engineer's mind told him it was probably psychosomatic, or maybe a side effect of the unusual biochemical infusion, but some deeper intuition insisted there was more to it, some intangible bond that defied easy explanation. The corridor opened into a domed antechamber whose high ceiling was shrouded in shadow. At the chamber's center stood a massive cylindrical column, easily 3 meters across, lined with grooves and metal plating that had corroded in places. It radiated a low, uneven hum reminiscent of a generator struggling for life. Ronan stepped forward, resting a palm against it and feeling that subtle vibration beneath his fingertips. "I think this might be the bunker's power core," he said, speaking softly even though there was no reason to whisper. "Or at least an integral component of it. If this place is as ancient as the architecture suggests, the technology is eons beyond anything from our current era. We might not even recognize half of its true functions." Leanna circled around the column, her lilac eyes drifting over the markings etched there, symbols interwoven in complex patterns. "They seem related to the script in the other room," she agreed, pausing where a large ring of text wrapped around the column's midsection. "If we can decipher the meaning, we might be able to bring this power core back to stable operation, or at least redirect enough energy to keep oxygen circulation going." Ronan frowned, stepping back to examine the rest of the chamber. He noticed a cluster of smaller consoles positioned along one wall, each sporting more of the unfamiliar glyphs. Half of the displays appeared dim or fully powered down, but one glowed faintly blue. "Look," he said, tipping his chin toward that console. "Maybe it's still receiving minimal power from this big cylinder. If so, we can see what operational systems remain." Leanna followed him to the console. "Careful," she cautioned, remembering how his last experimental button press had triggered a deafening alarm. They exchanged a glance, sharing a wry, unspoken understanding. Then Ronan carefully pressed his fingertips to the console's surface. A ripple of light spread across the dusty screen, illuminating lines of text that rearranged themselves in shifting colors. He frowned in concentration. "It's cycling through different display modes," he murmured, as if it's trying to find a recognized input. For a moment, an odd symbol pulsed brightly, and the hum in the chamber grew louder. The sensation set his teeth on edge. "We have to be methodical here," he whispered, half to himself. "No more random guesses." Minutes passed in tense silence as the two attempted to decode the console's interface. Ronan employed every scrap of xenotechnical knowledge he'd gleaned during his years on the station, while Leanna cross-referenced any morphological cues she could derive from her own species' linguistic archives. Occasionally, a symbol would blink green, making the entire column behind them throb with renewed energy for a brief moment, only to fade again when the sequence apparently failed. "It feels like a puzzle," Ronan muttered, stepping back in frustration after a particularly perplexing cycle left the screen a dull gray. "Each symbol must correspond to a function, but we can't read the instructions. If we had more stable power, maybe the console would do a better job of interfacing with us." Leanna rested her fingers lightly on his forearm. "Your station logs mentioned you once reverse-engineered an alien comm device in record time. You're good at seeing patterns where others might see chaos." He let out a short laugh. "That was a simpler language matrix, and the device was partially cataloged already. This place, it's like a labyrinth of unknown code, but I'll keep trying." He was about to lean over the console again when a wave of dizziness made his vision swim, reminding him that his body was still recovering. Leanna steadied him, concern etched on her features. "Slow down," she said softly. "You're still not 100%. You can't brute force your way through exhaustion." "Right, me," he replied, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Despite the life-giving effect of her earlier nourishment, he found himself growing tired once again. "Hunger's not a joke," he admitted, trying to mask just how shaky he felt. "I'm running on fumes." A flash of guilt crossed Leanna's expression. "My body can produce more if you need it," she offered gently. "Though it does," she hesitated, lips pressing into a thin line. "It does place a strain on me as well." He touched her hand, a quiet gesture of acknowledgement. "I won't ask for anything you can't safely give," he said. Yet even as he spoke, the hollow ache in his gut reminded him that their time was limited. Sensing his thoughts, she gave the faintest nod, a mix of resolve and reluctance. Before either could say more, an unexpected flicker of movement at the edge of the chamber drew their attention. A segment of wall slid open with a dull scrape, revealing a hidden passage. Startled, both of them whirled to face it, tension coiling. Dim light spilled from the narrow tunnel, inviting them deeper. "Did we trigger something with the console?" Leanna asked, stepping cautiously forward. "Possibly," Ronan answered, "or the bunker recognized our attempts to restore power." He cast a glance at her, a silent question. Should they follow this new lead or retreat? The alternative was staying in this chamber, chasing puzzle pieces that didn't yet fit. They chose to press on, curiosity and desperation fueling them. If the bunker had opened a new path, maybe it contained something they could use. Backup systems, more food, a stable environment. Together they advanced into the newly revealed corridor, the soft metallic hum beneath their feet echoing with every step, as if urging them onward. Unlike the rest of the bunker, this corridor was smooth and unmarked by the swirling script. The walls glimmered with a faint pearlescent sheen, suggesting a different type of construction, or perhaps a separate phase in the bunker's history. As they walked, the narrow passage opened into a rectangular room with a series of tall, arching alcoves along the walls, each lined with a lattice of cables and crystalline nodes that still carried a faint glow. At the room's center, a circular platform rose about waist-high, its surface etched in geometric patterns that converged at an oval recess. Ronan approached it, drawn by the rhythmic pulse that emanated from the platform, gentle but insistent, like a slow heartbeat. He brushed away a thin layer of dust, revealing a set of intersecting lines. They reminded him of star maps, or maybe some advanced circuit board. Leanna stepped around to the far side, studying the alcoves. "There's definitely more power in here than in the other chambers," she noted. "Look at how brightly these nodes glow." She trailed her fingertips across one of the crystalline structures, eliciting a soft chime. Her eyebrows rose. "It's reacting to my touch." Ronan frowned thoughtfully. "It's possible this is some kind of control or memory room," he speculated. "Those crystals could be data storage, especially if this ancient civilization used a system based on refracted light or energy pulses." Leanna nodded, circling back towards him. "Then the question is how we interface with it. I don't see a conventional console." He gestured to the oval recess on the platform. "This might be a place for a specific item, or maybe even a living being's hand. Ancient designs sometimes rely on biometric triggers." He glanced at her, recalling her earlier mention of empathic or biochemical signals. A part of him wondered if their newly forged link, the subtle awareness that still lingered in his mind, could serve as a key here. "Want to try placing your hand here?" Leanna hesitated. "I can't predict what'll happen," she warned, though the curiosity in her eyes was undeniable. "Neither can I," he said with a wry smile. "But we're not going to solve this by standing around. Worst case, we trigger another alarm, but maybe we'll also unlock valuable data or find a stable power feed to keep the oxygen flowing." Exhaling sharply, Liana splayed her fingers over the recess. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the etched lines on the platform began to glow, racing outward in all directions like quicksilver. The archways around them came alive, each crystal lattice shimmering with light that soared up toward the ceiling. Startled, Ronan stepped back as a low hum shook the floor. An overlapping series of symbols appeared in midair, shimmering like holograms, yet with a texture and depth he couldn't fully categorize. Leanna gasped, and a flicker of the same silver luminescence traced up her arm, similar to what he'd witnessed during her nutrient production, but more diffuse. "It's responding to me," she whispered, transfixed. "There's an energy signature that feels almost familiar, like an echo of what I used to feed you, but magnified." Ronan reached for her shoulder. "Then see if it leads anywhere. This might be our best shot at salvaging power for the bunker." Leanna closed her eyes as though listening to a silent voice. Ronan, too, felt a tingling in the air, a subtle vibration that tickled his skin. The holographic symbols in front of them coalesced into a more coherent pattern, forming rings of text that rotated independently like orbiting planets. A swirl of color flickered within each ring, and in random intervals, arcs of light connected one ring to another. "This place uses living energy," Leanna said at last, her words tinged with awe. Not purely biological, but some amalgam of stored power that resonates with a living being's own biofield. It's extremely sophisticated. Ronan recognized her intense focus from the times he'd seen her operating advanced medical gear back on the station. Even if he couldn't fully perceive what she was experiencing, he knew she was gleaning critical information. So they designed it to be operated by beings who could provide a certain key signature, he ventured. She nodded, eyes drifting open just enough to meet his. I suspect so, but this system is incomplete, likely damaged by the passage of time. It's straining, which could be why the bunker's environment is failing. The entire structure might be on a partial standby, awaiting a proper energy input to stabilize it. Then perhaps we can divert some of our own energy, Ronan said, half joking, half serious. The memory of her nutrient feeding flashed through his mind, and with it, an unbidden awareness of her body's capacity to produce extraordinary biochemical phenomena. But how? His question hung in the charged air. Leanna drew in a measured breath. When I provided you with nourishment earlier, it involved more than just chemical sustenance. We tapped into something deeper. A synergy between my physiology and your immediate need. If this ancient technology is built around similar principles, we might be able to replicate a form of that connection. A flush heated Ronan's cheeks, though he couldn't tell if it was embarrassment or a rush of excitement. Are you suggesting we use the same process that fed me to feed this bunker? Not exactly the same, Leanna clarified hastily, but similar in concept. The station I served on was researching ways to harness interpersonal biofields for medical applications. The results were minimal. Yet here, it seems the builders perfected a method to absorb or amplify that kind of resonance on a grand scale. He blew out a breath, scanning the swirling lights overhead. It felt surreal to stand in a hidden chamber older than their entire recorded histories, discussing the possibility of fueling it with an intimate biological bond. If we succeed, we might restore the bunker, maybe even trigger something beyond just life support. Who knows what else it's capable of? Leanna pulled her hand away from the platform. The floating symbols flickered, but didn't vanish entirely, as though awaiting further input. It's worth trying if we want to survive, she said quietly. But you must understand, if we go deeper down this path, the connection we've already begun might grow far stronger. My people consider that a permanent bond, not undertaken lightly. Her earnest gaze held his. Ronan recalled the moment she'd allowed him to drink the fluid that had sustained him. It had been undeniably intimate, but desperation had made the choice simpler. Now they stood at a crossroads. Feed this ancient technology with the synergy of their shared life force, or watch the bunker and themselves succumb to decay. Ronan couldn't deny the quickening of his heartbeat, nor the swirl of conflicting feelings. Part of him marveled at the scientific implications, an entirely new form of energy transfer, bridging biological and technological realms. Another part of him was uncomfortably aware that he was about to entangle himself with Leanna in a way that went far beyond mere survival. He rubbed the back of his neck, offering a tentative nod. We don't have much choice if we want a fighting chance, and I think I trust you. I know how personal this is for you. Leanna's posture relaxed slightly. Then let's try. I'll attempt to guide the energy into this platform, but we have to be mindful that it could be dangerous. If our connection is disrupted mid-transfer, the feedback could damage us, or it might overload the bunker's systems. Ronan swallowed. So either we succeed or we blow ourselves up. Typical day at the office, right? A faint smile tugged at Leanna's lips. I see your sense of humor is intact. That's comforting. She gestured for him to come closer to the platform. She placed her hand over the etched recess again, and the swirling holograms flared brighter. Stand behind me, place your hands on my shoulders or wherever you feel comfortable maintaining contact. He stepped in, heart pounding. Gently, he laid his palms on her upper arms, feeling the cool firmness of her skin. The memory of tasting her life-saving fluid flashed again, stirring a tangle of emotions he quickly pushed aside. Ready? He asked, voice hushed. Leanna closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. Silver luminescence began to ripple across her form, starting at her collarbone and moving outward, just like before. Only now, instead of offering nourishment directly to Ronan, she channeled that energy into the console. The swirling glyphs overhead responded in kind, brightening into a dazzling tapestry. Tentatively, Ronan matched her breathing, allowing himself to slip into the same mental calm he'd summoned earlier. He felt a curious tug at his core, like a gentle siphoning of warmth. It wasn't painful, more like the sensation one might get after donating blood. But layered beneath it was an intimate pulse of shared awareness. Lyanna gasped, and the lines of light on her skin flared. In that instant, Ronan caught fleeting impressions, glimpses of her memories, or perhaps emotions. He saw a rapid flash of alien starscapes, the swirling violet oceans of her homeworld, the calm interior of a station lab. He felt her determination, her lingering fear, her cautious hope. Then it all blurred into white noise as the console erupted with sound. A subdued roar echoed through the chamber, and the large column in the previous room seemed to absorb the surge of energy. The entire bunker trembled, but not as violently as before. It felt more like a massive exhalation, as if the ancient structure were waking from a long sleep. Lyanna's breathing came in quick bursts, beads of sweat forming along her temples. "It's responding," she managed, the silver glow shimmering around her like a halo. "But it's still not stable." Ronan tightened his grip on her arms, riding the wave of dizzying sensations. He sensed that Lyanna was pushing her limits. This was no small act for her physiology. Unsure how to help, he instinctively tried to reverse the flow, offering some of his own life force in return. He didn't know how exactly to do it, but a part of him recalled the subtle energy he'd felt when she nursed him back to strength. At first, nothing happened. Then he felt a ripple through their contact, as if his body recognized a channel it could open. A mild warmth blossomed in his chest and trickled into Lyanna. She inhaled sharply, her eyes snapping open. "You're feeding me?" she asked in surprise, voice wavering between wonder and disbelief. He hesitated, uncertain. I don't know. I just felt you draining too much, and I tried to push some energy back." She gazed at him over her shoulder, lilac eyes wide and glowing faintly in the swirling half-light. "Humans shouldn't be able to do that. My species has a unique organ for this exchange. You lack that structure, unless—" She trailed off, struck by a realization. "Unless the first feeding altered me somehow," he finished for her. The possibility sent a jolt of excitement and alarm through him. The bunker trembled again, reminding them that they were in the middle of a precarious operation. He pushed aside the flood of questions and focused on maintaining the link. Slowly, Lyanna pressed her other hand to the console, steadying herself. The platform flared brighter, as if it were greedily soaking up the synergy they generated. The glowing lines that had arced up her body now extended across Ronan's arms, faint threads of silver bridging them like living circuits. Despite the surreal display, Ronan felt unexpectedly calm. Perhaps it was the sense of unity, or the knowledge that they were acting together in perfect alignment toward a single goal. As the platform's light stabilized, a series of layered symbols appeared, rotating calmly in front of them. Lyanna peered at these new glyphs, her features lined with exertion. "This might be a control prompt," she breathed, voice tight. "I think it's asking for a command, or an authorization to activate full systems." Ronan recognized a recurring pattern among the symbols. He'd seen something similar during his attempts to decode the bunker's interface. He raised his right hand, the one connected by the luminous thread, and reached into the floating display. The moment his fingers passed through the holographic ring, it shimmered, warping to accommodate him. A resonant tone, both musical and mechanical, filled the chamber. Then, with a grand final surge, the swirling lights pulsed and vanished, leaving behind a single symbol suspended in midair. The symbol itself glowed a soft green, reminiscent of a universal standby or ready indicator. Lyanna staggered, and Ronan caught her, ignoring the crackle of static that skated along his skin. Together, they collapsed to their knees beside the platform as the hum of the bunker's systems shifted from strained to steady. "We did it," Ronan gasped, chest heaving. For a long moment, they simply knelt there, pressed together amid the lingering haze of charged air. The battered walls no longer groaned ominously, and the corridor outside was lit by a steadier glow than before, a sign that power was circulating more robustly throughout the bunker. A new hush filled the space, as though the environment itself had paused to acknowledge their success. Leanna coughed, then forced a small laugh that rang hollow with exhaustion. "I can't believe that worked," she said, looking at him with a mixture of relief and amazement. Her hair clung to her forehead, damp with perspiration. "I've never attempted anything like that in my life. Neither have any of my people, as far as I'm aware." Ronan offered a tired grin. "Guess we're blazing new trails in xenobiology," he joked softly. But as he looked at her, the gravity of what they'd done began to settle in. They had effectively merged energies to power an ancient system, forging a bond that, if her culture's lore was true, might be permanent. He wanted to ask if she felt the same lingering sense of connection, but the question lodged in his throat. She must have sensed his thoughts because her expression turned sober. "There could be lasting repercussions, culturally, biologically. My people hold these abilities as near sacred. Sharing them with someone outside our species is unprecedented." Ronan reached up, brushing a stray lock of her white hair behind her ear. "You saved my life twice over," he said gently, "and maybe saved us both from suffocating. If your people don't understand that we had no other option, then so be it. But I'm not about to regret it." A flicker of emotion passed over her face, gratefulness perhaps, and she averted her gaze. "Nor do I," she whispered. Then she cleared her throat, as if to regain composure. "We should see what systems we've restored. Maybe we can patch through a communication signal, or at least ensure the oxygen supply is stable." He helped her stand, supporting her as they leaned on the platform. The single green-hued symbol still hovered in midair, bobbing gently like it awaited a further prompt. When Ronan placed his hand near it, the symbol dissolved into strands of light that darted across the ceiling, illuminating a spidery network of conduits. The effect was almost beautiful, like seeing the bunker's arteries alight with new lifeblood. A hissing sound from the corridor caught their attention. Following it, they found a previously locked panel sliding open. Within, they discovered a robust console that displayed multiple readouts, each showing a different facet of the bunker's functionality. Environmental controls, structural integrity, and something labeled, at least in partial translation, as spatial node access. Leanna scanned the environmental data. Oxygen levels are climbing back to safer parameters. Filtration systems are reinitializing. Relief softened her features. "That buys us time, at least." Ronan peered over her shoulder, drawn to a separate display. "Spatial node access," he read aloud, though the actual text was partly replaced by glyphs. "Is that some kind of teleportation technology? A gateway? Or just a fancy term for connecting to other bunkers or outposts?" She shifted to examine that screen. "If so, we might contact someone, or discover a path out of here entirely." Her eyes flicked to his. "Think we have enough energy left to find out?" Despite his fatigue, Ronan nodded resolutely. "We've come this far. Let's unravel this next mystery." The newly restored console's screens glowed in vibrant blues and greens, casting dancing reflections on the chamber's ancient walls. Ronan and Leanna stood side by side, eyes flicking over the symbols labeled Spatial Node Access. Though much of the text remained indecipherable, there were enough partial translations on display, simple words like active, link, coordinate, transfer, to imply this system was far more than mere long-distance communication. Leanna tapped a pulsating symbol in the upper corner of the screen. Instantly, the bunker's central column, a generator or nexus of some kind, let out a low thrumming note that vibrated through the floor. An overlay of concentric circles appeared, each one studded with smaller glyphs representing potential destinations. She narrowed her lilac eyes, trying to correlate the unknown symbols with the partial translations. "If I'm interpreting this correctly, these circles might represent nodes that exist across multiple star systems. It's almost like a map." Ronan angled closer, bracing one hand on the console. "A map that could be used for instantaneous or near-instantaneous travel," he wondered aloud. The idea rang fantastical, but then again, everything about this bunker was extraordinary. If so, it'd rival any known warp drive or jump gate technology, potentially centuries ahead of what humans or your people have. Leanna swallowed her throat tight. This could mean the civilization that built this bunker wasn't just creating shelters. They might have been constructing an entire network of safe havens, connected by advanced teleportation or spatial folding. If that's the case, one of those nodes might still be active, maybe even near inhabited space where we can call for help. Her voice trembled with cautious excitement. The bunker's environment was improved, but they were hardly out of danger. Food remained scarce, and the restored filtration system might fail again without warning. If they could activate one of these nodes, it could either save them or condemn them if it malfunctioned. Ronan began methodically poking at the smaller glyphs, striving not to trigger any catastrophic feedback. The console responded in a series of gentle chimes. Lines of text scrolled by, occasionally shifting into the partial translation overlay. Calibrating. Power source. Synchronization. He glanced at Leanna. Synchronization, like the synergy we use to jumpstart the core? She nodded. Likely, this technology relies on the same principle of life force or biofield connection. If we want to open a stable portal, or whatever this node is, we may need to repeat that process on a larger scale. He took a measured breath. We barely managed it with the bunker alone. Scaling that up, we could risk burning out, or blowing this entire place to bits. Leanna pressed a hand to her chest. For a moment, the faint silver glow flickered beneath her palm. We won't know unless we try. And if these data readings are accurate, it's only a matter of time before the bunker's damage overwhelms the fixes we've made. Our newfound life support might be temporary. Despite his fatigue, Ronan felt a stirring of determination. Then let's see if we can open a door somewhere, anywhere, beyond these walls. We'll have to be careful, but we've come too far to give up now. They spent what felt like hours cross-referencing the partial translations, each letter or glyph painstakingly matched against the bunker's data logs. Occasionally, they returned to the main corridor where the newly active panels offered glimpses of stable oxygen levels, but the numbers never climbed high enough to guarantee long-term survival. Notably, the control screen for the spatial node repeated one particular sequence of glyphs, a set of instructions, possibly a warning, that flashed every time they tried to engage the system. Leanna's brow furrowed as she studied the message. We keep seeing these same symbols paired with a cautionary phrase, something about shared presence and threshold minimum. I can't quite parse it, but it's almost like a safety lock. It won't let us open the node unless it detects a sufficient energy resonance. Ronan's lips thinned. It's probably designed to ensure the travelers have the exact biofield signature required for stable passage. If your species feeding process or essence transfer is a smaller example, this node might need an even stronger or more focused application of that same principle. He paused, rubbing the bridge of his nose. As much as the concept thrilled the engineer in him, he worried about Leanna's well-being. Every time she initiated that link, it seemed to drain her, forcing her body into intense biochemical shifts. And though he'd begun to sense he could reciprocate in some rudimentary way, feeding energy back to her, he wasn't certain it would be enough. "Are you sure you want to attempt this?" he asked quietly, turning to her. "We could keep trying to send a simpler distress signal, or perhaps wait here in hopes someone from the station is still alive to come looking." Her gaze held his steadily. "We both know the reactor breach likely destroyed most of the station. Even if there were survivors, their escape pods might not have found any place to land. We can't rely on a random rescue when we have a possible solution right in front of us." Ronan exhaled, nodding. "All right, let's think it through logically. If the node requires a strong biofield synergy, we probably have to replicate the feeding bond. But this time, we direct the energy into the console's matrix, the same way we powered up the bunker, only at a higher threshold." A hint of color appeared on Leanna's cheeks. "That feeding bond is extremely personal in my culture," she murmured, even as a faint luminescence glimmered along her collarbone at the memory. "But we can't pretend we haven't crossed that line already. Let's do it. Just try not to judge me if it looks strange from a human perspective." He reached for her hand, his own heart pounding. "No judgment. You've risked everything to save me, and to save both of us, really. Whatever it takes to make this work, I'm with you. They exchanged a long, charged look. Then, with renewed resolve, they turned to the console. The readouts continued to blink, awaiting the one command that would either free them or destroy them in a final surge. Back in the central chamber, the cylindrical power core emanated a steady pulse, far healthier than before but still tinged with the precariousness of a structure running well beyond its original design lifespan. Lyanna led Ronan toward the same circular platform that had responded so dramatically to their combined energy. This time, the swirling symbols above the platform shone brighter, as though sensing their intent. Once we start, she explained in a measured tone, we have to see it through. Abruptly halting could cause a catastrophic feedback loop. The console's partial translations suggest the node might generate a temporary rift, a kind of spatial fold. We'd have to step through it before it collapses. Ronan's mouth felt dry. So this isn't just about powering some beacons or sending a signal. We might actually open a portal right here? Lyanna nodded gravely. That's what it implies. And from the glimpses I got, it could lead to a sister facility, another bunker or station that might be intact, possibly on a different planet or even another star system. He dragged a hand through his hair. It's incredible, also terrifying. We might end up somewhere hostile to life or inside a collapsed ruin. True, she conceded, but staying here is a slow death sentence. Our partial fixes will only last so long without a full maintenance crew and additional resources. A heavy silence settled, broken only by the bunker's steady thrum. Finally, Ronan stepped onto the platform, turning to face her. I'm in. Let's open this door. She joined him, and at once both felt the subtle shift in the air. In the prior attempt to power the bunker, they discovered how their bodies could mesh energies, fueling the ancient tech. Now, the systems seemed to anticipate their next move, its internal lights pulsing in harmony with their shared heartbeat. Lyanna exhaled sharply, and the silver glow began to trace her skin again. Her uniform shifted slightly, baring the upper portion of her torso where the luminescence was strongest. Ronan instinctively moved closer, bracing one hand against her lower back. The moment their bodies touched, he felt the telltale surge, that same intangible link flaring to life between them. Despite the familiarity, it still startled him. The sense of standing at the edge of a vast ocean, each wave carrying echoes of Lyanna's emotions and memories. The air around them crackled with potential, and overhead the swirling glyphs converged into a single radiant spiral. Lyanna's breathing hitched. She drew him nearer, allowing him to drink in the nutrient-laden essence from the glowing region along her collarbone. The taste was as disorienting as ever, electric, warm, and layered with a sweetness that seemed to bypass hunger and go straight to his bloodstream. His vision flashed with half-formed pictures of her life, her homeworld skies, her family, then pivoted to the present, to the bunker around them. But this time, he didn't merely receive. Focusing on the memory of that reciprocation, he pushed back, channeling a pulse of his own vitality into her. A tangible wave of heat and light flowed between them, forming a feedback loop that caused both to gasp. Their joined energy blazed into the circular platform. Symbols erupted along the chamber walls, some so bright they left streaks in Ronan's vision. He sensed the bunker's main column drawing upon the flow, straining to handle the sheer volume of life force pouring through. A metallic groan echoed overhead as the structure shuddered, and for one terrifying moment, he thought the entire bunker might tear itself apart. We're pushing it too hard, he managed, voice strained. Are you okay? Lyanna's face glistened with sweat, her eyes half-lidded from concentration. Yes, she replied, though her trembling limbs told a different story. Just a little more. Together they intensified their focus, trying to keep the energy transfer smooth rather than chaotic. Little by little, the cacophony around them steadied, and the swirling glyphs overhead arranged into a crisp spiral pattern. A swirling vortex of light formed at the center of the platform, rotating faster and faster until it coalesced into what looked like a shimmering aperture. Ronan's eyes widened. The aperture flickered and spat arcs of blue-white lightning. Through it, he glimpsed swirling darkness, punctuated by brief flashes of alien landscapes or starry expanses. He couldn't be certain. The entire portal looked unstable, but it was undeniably there. Leanna's lips parted, awe momentarily eclipsing her exhaustion. The node is opening. At that instant, the bunker's power core let out a wrenching moan. Several overhead lights blew out in a shower of sparks, and the platform beneath their feet lurched. The aperture quivered, as though on the brink of collapse. Ronan's stomach plunged. Now or never, Leanna choked out, the strain in her voice obvious. If we hesitate, the node will collapse, and the energy feedback might kill us. Before Ronan could respond, a final surge of impetus coursed through them, amplifying the portal's glow. He sensed Leanna's will guiding it, her mind locked on the possibility of an intact sister facility. He clenched her hand in his, heart hammering. Go, she cried, and together they stepped forward into the shimmering threshold. The transition was like being wrenched through a narrow funnel of starlight. Every cell in Ronan's body seemed to stretch and compress in the same instant. His vision dissolved into swirling lights, and he clung to Leanna's grip as a lifeline. He was distantly aware of a roaring sound, a vortex of temperature extremes. Then, stillness, or rather, a sudden shift from the chaotic maelstrom to an abrupt calm. He realized his feet were no longer on the bunker's platform. Instead, he found himself in another chamber, a softly lit space made of sleek, silvery metal. Leanna staggered against him, nearly falling if not for his quick catch. They had done it, passed through an ancient gate to some unknown destination. The question was, what now? Their first impressions were of crisp, almost sterile air and ambient lighting that pulsed in a calm, steady rhythm. The floor beneath their feet felt solid and cool, and the walls rose in smooth curves with none of the erosion or damage they had seen in the old bunker. This place was pristine, as though it had been maintained or was recently constructed. Still clutching each other, they surveyed their surroundings. The room was oval, lined by several recessed panels and display units that glowed with pale teal illumination. Unlike the crumbling consoles in the original bunker, these seemed active and functional, humming softly like living machinery. Leanna pressed a hand to her chest, her breath ragged. The silver glow still traced faint lines over her skin, a leftover resonance from their transit. It's stable here, she said in wonder. I can't sense the same structural failures we had to deal with. Ronan helped her stand upright. His own muscles felt shaky from the intense energy exchange, but a surge of relief buoyed him. They had escaped the dying bunker. If this facility was truly operational, then maybe they had a chance at real survival. I guess we picked the right node, he breathed, forcing a weak grin. Her smile was tentative but genuine. Seems so. Let's see what we can find out. They approached one of the consoles, noticing that the symbols were similar to what they had studied in the bunker, but displayed more comprehensively here. Using their partial knowledge of the glyphs, they tapped through a sequence that looked like status or report. Immediately, a scrolling text came into view, accompanied by pictorial diagrams. Leanna traced her fingertips over the interface. It's referencing the entire network. This facility appears to be a central hub, a control station possibly. From here, they might have managed multiple bunkers or outposts across different systems. Ronan's gaze flicked over the diagrams. One showed lines radiating between spherical nodes, reminding him of star charts with definitive routes. Another indicated a series of readouts for environmental integrity. If these readouts are accurate, the air composition here is nearly perfect for both of us. Maybe there's a functioning life support system. Leanna nodded, a mixture of hope and gratitude flooding her features. We might not have to worry about suffocating or rummaging for ancient canisters. This place could have an automated supply. Before they could investigate further, a soft chime echoed from deeper within the facility. It had the same tonal quality as the console alerts, but more resonant, as if carried through hidden speakers. Ronan and Leanna exchanged a quick glance, hearts pounding. Something or someone had activated an alarm or notification in response to their arrival. A moment later, lights flickered along the base of the far wall, revealing a wide, sliding door that parted with a smooth hiss. Beyond it lay a corridor illuminated in gentle blues, the chime repeated, beckoning them forward. Ronan's pulse spiked. Did we just wake something up? Leanna's expression shifted to guarded determination. Possibly, but we came here looking for a way to survive, and maybe a way to contact our people. Let's see what's waiting for us. They ventured through the open door into a hallway that curved gracefully, each section rimmed with glowing lines that pulsed in sync with the distant chime. The air was cool and refreshing, carrying no trace of the decay or dust they had endured in the bunker. Their footsteps echoed softly, a strange contrast to the looming sense of mystery. Halfway down, the corridor branched. One passage continued forward, while another angled off to the right. A small panel on the wall displayed rotating glyphs, including the partial translation to Central Repository on the forward path. Leanna pointed to the right, where the text read Biolab. Biolab might have medical supplies, or at least data on how these people managed environment and nourishment, she reasoned. It might also explain the technology behind your changes. Her voice trailed off, the memory of his reciprocal feeding still fresh in both their minds. Ronan gave a slight nod. And the central repository might hold records about the entire network. We could split up. She cut him off immediately. No, absolutely not. We're on an unknown station with unknown systems. Splitting up is too risky. He held up his hands in surrender. Fair point. Let's pick one route first. Biolab it is. They turned right, following the corridor until it opened into a large, oval-shaped laboratory. Walls of transparent panels revealed rows of containment chambers, each with softly glowing readouts. Instead of the dusty gloom of the old bunker, these chambers looked downright futuristic, sterile, gleaming, and apparently powered. As they stepped inside, a gentle wave of light swept across the floor, almost as if scanning them. A console near the entrance lit up in response, displaying a series of rapidly cycling symbols. Then, to their astonishment, a synthesized voice, light and melodic, but unmistakably artificial, spoke in an unfamiliar language. Leanna tensed. An AI system, perhaps, she guessed, eyes darting across the lab. It's probably trying to identify us. Ronan tried tapping the console to see if it could shift into a translation mode. The voice continued speaking, eventually projecting a holographic interface that depicted an outline of two humanoid forms with question marks where the heads would be. A small panel on the right side displayed a message. Bioscan incomplete. Species not recognized. Begin calibration? Looks like it wants a sample, Ronan observed, glancing at Leanna. We might need to let it scan us if we want to proceed. Her shoulders squared. We've come this far. Let's do it. They stepped onto the designated footprint markers on the floor, allowing the system to pass a series of scanning beams over them. The beams tingled against their skin, but caused no pain. The console beeped a few times, and new lines of glyphs popped up, interspersed with partial translations. Hybrid synergy, biofield anomaly, unknown gene markers. Ronan exchanged a troubled look with Liana. It's detecting the changes from our repeated feeding process. Maybe the merged energy that's become part of us both. She swallowed hard, nodding. I suspected as much. My people rarely share that bond, even among ourselves, let alone with an outsider. The system here might consider us a brand new species altogether. Before they could fully absorb the implications, the AI voice chimed again, and one of the transparent containment chambers slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a cylindrical device, roughly the size of a small backpack, adorned with pulsating lights. A panel above it displayed a scrolling message. Portable life support, nutrient synthesizer, field stabilizer. Leanna's breath caught. Nutrient synthesizer. This might be exactly what we need. If it works properly, we won't have to rely solely on my body's emergency feeding. Ronan approached the device carefully. The station's offering it to us, or at least allowing us to take it. Maybe it concluded that we require a stable supply of nutrients, a big improvement over rummaging for centuries-old canisters. Still, his fingers hesitated above the device's handle. It feels surreal to accept tech from an AI we can't fully communicate with. A faint smile touched Liana's lips. Everything about the last few days has been surreal. But we're past the point of caution, aren't we? This is a chance to thrive instead of merely survive. He nodded and lifted the device free. It had more heft than he expected, and he caught a whiff of something akin to ozone as it powered up in his hands. A small display lit up, showing a simplified user interface with color-coded bars. Another partial translation scrolled by. Insert base genetic template or biochemical sample. Leanna pursed her lips thoughtfully. It wants a sample to produce specific nutrients tailored to your or our needs. My species or yours, or perhaps a blend. Ronan arched an eyebrow. We might have just found a safe alternative to the more personal feeding routine. A mix of relief and an odd flicker of disappointment wove through Leanna's gaze. Emotions he sensed even without her speaking them. Regardless of the complicated intimacy, they both recognized the significance of not needing to drain her body each time he grew weak. Let's give it a sample, she said, tilting her neck slightly. A few drops of the nutrient fluid might be enough for the machine to replicate. He nodded and carefully placed the device on a nearby table. Leanna focused, summoning the faint silver glow at her collarbone for just a moment, enough to let a few luminous droplets collect in a small receptacle attached to the synthesizer's intake. Almost immediately, the machine hummed to life, scanning the sample. Within seconds, it displayed a progress bar that inched upward, culminating in a soft chime. Seconds later, a nozzle on the device dispensed a pale, viscous liquid into a holding vial. Ronan picked it up and sniffed. The smell was reminiscent of the fluid he'd sampled from Leanna, but subtly different, perhaps less potent, lacking the full depth of direct biological connection. Tentatively, he took a small sip. A mild warmth spread through him, easing the persistent gnaw of hunger. He flashed Leanna a grin. It works. Not quite the same flavor, but definitely nourishing. Her shoulders slackened with relief. That's a huge step forward. Now we have a sustainable means of feeding you and me, if needed, without pushing our bond to the brink. For a few heartbeats, they simply stared at each other, a potent mixture of gratitude and lingering emotion passing between them. Much as the device solved their immediate problem, it also symbolized a shift. They were no longer bound by desperation to share her intimate, life-saving secret. Their bond, however, remained. At that moment, the corridor outside the lab hummed with renewed energy. Lights brightened, and a series of melodic tones echoed through the station, similar to a beacon announcing arrivals or departures. Something else had changed, and as the final notes of the chime faded, the voice of the AI resonated once more, a single word that scrolled across the nearest console in partial translation. Approach. Looking back on their journey from the crumbling bunker to the immaculate alien facility, I can't help but see it as a testament to courage, trust, and the power of forging unexpected connections. Leanna's profound act of sharing her life-sustaining essence shattered long-held barriers, while Ronan's inventive spirit embraced the unknown. Together, they uncovered ancient technology that rivaled any known civilization, but all under the looming threat of isolation and collapse. In the end, it wasn't just survival at stake. It was the spark of hope that two people from different worlds could unite, protect each other, and create a shared future. Thank you for joining us on this adventure. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did you enjoy the mix of personal intimacy and sci-fi discovery? What would you like to see next in tales like this? Leave a comment below, share your ideas, and let's keep the conversation going. Together we can explore countless new frontiers, both on the page and among the stars.